Good morning. My name is Zena Tucker. My pronouns are she and her. On behalf of this congregation, welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Huntsville. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of Native tribes. Whether you have joined us online or you are here in our sanctuary, we are glad to have you with us in this sacred time. We choose to be together. We are an open community of learning, sharing, and justice making. You are welcome here. Every part of you, just the way you are. Our congregation is served by our minister, Reverend Jamie Dingus. She is available by contacting the office for pastoral care and to answer questions about Unitarian Universalism. If you are a newcomer, please sign our guest book in the foyer to receive our weekly email newsletter. Please also take a moment to silence your electronic devices. If you have a joy, sorrow, or important milestone you would like shared during our circle of candles and included in the pastoral prayer, please write it on one of the white cards in the pew in front of you and place it in the offering basket. For community news, check out our email newsletter, Facebook page, and website. And I'd like our announcement today is we have a guest speaker, Dr. Katie Owens-Murphy of the University of North Alabama, a conversation about capital punishment. Now I would like to invite Daniel Barr to ring the singing bowl to help us enter the service more deeply. Ring. Finally, having gathered in a shared quest for truth, meaning, and purpose, let us light our chalice with these words from Reverend Tom Goldsmith. Symbol of light and knowledge, symbol of warmth and freedom, we light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love. Now let us enter into this morning's service more deeply with music for centering, followed by our thread song, number 1023, in the Teal hymnal, Building Bridges.
visions. I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony, building bridges between our divisions. I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony. We could make such sweet harmony.
Our call to worship is from J.R.R. Tolkien. All have their worth, and each contributes to the worth of the others. Now let us rise in body or spirit and sing number 148 in the gray hymnal, Let Freedom Span Both East and West.
Let freedom span both east and west, and love both the south and north, in universal fellowship throughout the whole wide earth. In beauty, wonder everywhere, let us communion find. Compassion be the golden cord, close binding humankind. Beyond all barriers of race, of color, caste, or creed, let us make friendship, human worth, our common faith and deed. Then east and west will meet and share, and south shall build with north, one human commonwealth of good throughout the whole wide earth. Each Sunday, we remain risen in body or spirit to sing our doxology, followed by our aspiration of faith, found on these blue cards in your pew. When we get to the aspiration of faith, please turn and face one another and share these words together. Let's sing. From all who dwell below the skies, let faith and hope with love arise. Let beauty, truth, and good be sung for every land, by every tongue. De todos bow el gran sol, sura esperanza fe amor, verdad y belleza cantando, de cada tierra, cada voz. May love be the spirit of this church. May the quest for truth be its sacrament, and service be its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, and to help one another in fellowship. This is our aspiration. Please be seated.
And now our story for all ages by Eva Reese.
Do we have any So this is a story of John Lewis, and a person that I highly admire for a very long time. And the author is Jabari Asim, and this is the story of John Lewis. Little John Lewis loved the spring, as most of us do. He loved it not only because it was the time when the whole planet came alive, but also because it was the season of the chicks. Winter was too cold to bring them safely into the world, and summer was too hot, and spring was just right. And everyone on the farm had work to do. Work and put your trust in God, John's mama used to say, and God's going to take care of his his children. Trusting in God was easy. Work was a harder bargain. There was just so much to do on a huge farm in southern Alabama. Every March, John's father hitched the plow to his stubborn old mule. "Giddy up," he'd shout, and together they'd break new ground, carving lines in the earth. In the fall, after months of planting, weeding, and tending, the cotton would be ready for picking. John was excited to be in charge of the chickens. There were about 60 of them, Rhode Island Reds, strong-winged bantams, Dominiques with gray stripes as dull as dishwater, and legs as yellow as daisies. John loved to see them flutter and strut and flap their wings. And every day John got up early and fed them dried corn just shelled from the cob, then lined their little nests with fresh straw. Cluck, 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 the chickens said. John knew they meant thank you. In a soft voice, John would say to them, "Enjoy this day that God has given us." The chickens, looking straight at him, seemed to understand. As much as John loved spring, he loved church even more. On Sundays, the whole family headed to services. John and his brothers were dressed in slacks and crisp white shirts, and his sisters in neat dresses. Outside the church, friends and relatives greeted each other with great big smiles. Like the ministers he heard in church, John wanted to preach. So he gathered his chickens in the yard. John stretched out his arms above his flock and let the words pour forth. The chickens nodded and dipped their beaks as if they agreed. They swayed to the sound of his voice. John's brothers and sisters couldn't tell one bird from another. John knew every one, and he had a line of verse for each of them. "Blessed are the peacemakers," he'd say when they fought over their morning meal. "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness," he would tell the hen who didn't want to share, "for they shall be satisfied." When the hen called Big Bell fell into the well, got stuck, John was determined to save her. He filled a basket with breadcrumbs, and when he lowered it down, she climbed in and was pulled to safety. "God makes miracles every day," John preached. "When you're down, he lifts you up, Sister Big Bell. I believe you know what I mean." Cluck, 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 Big Bell replied. John knew she meant amen. John's hen house sermons became so regular that his brothers and sisters took to calling him preacher. He didn't mind. He knew that someday he'd speak before thousands. He hoped that his words would stir people's souls and move them to action. For now, though, he had his own church right here among the pine trees and rolling hills of southern Alabama. Morning would find him in his usual place, preaching to the chickens. But I would like to also add the author's note, which I think is really telling, and I totally agree with him. So the author, again, is Jabaria Sim. I've always been an enthusiastic admirer of John Lewis. I knew of his brave participation as an original member of the Freedom Riders, Americans in who 1961 rode buses into the Deep South to protest the segregation of black and white travelers, who were forced to sit on separate benches and drink from separate fountains. I was aware that he had been chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, a group of young people who use civil disobedience to work toward full equity for all. And in this month, it's justice and equity is our theme. I knew that he had been the youngest member of the Big Six black leaders who led the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. In 1963, the largest public demonstration in American history at that time. I knew that in 1965 he stood with Reverend Hosea Williams at the front of the line when troopers attacked unarmed demonstrators on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. I learned even more about Lewis when I read Walking in the Wind, his extraordinary memoir. In it, he wrote, "I never really saw myself as a leader in the traditional sense of the word. I saw myself as a participator, an activist, a doer." And I'd like to add, us and we. Not long after I read the book, I met Lewis when I had the great privilege of introducing him at the National Book Festival on the National Mall. I found myself drawn to the passages in his memoir in which he described his childhood in Pike County, Alabama. As a young boy, he dreamed of being a preacher, moving crowds to action with the power of his sermons. But he was a doer even then. And instead of just dreaming, he practiced with his captive audience of chickens. "I preached to my birds just about every night," he wrote. "They would sit very quietly and some slightly moving their heads back and forth, mesmerized, I guess, by the sound of my voice. I could imagine that they were my congregation, and me, I was a preacher." I relied on Lewis's recollections when fashioning this story, especially his memories of Lil Pullet and Big Bell. I hope readers find the resulting tale as mesmerizing as those chickens found young John Lewis long ago. Thank you.
Thank you so much. UUCH's mission is that our ministries will foster lifelong spiritual seeking and growth, strengthen our community, support social justice action, welcome diversity, and let people know we are here. If you would like to support us with a monetary contribution, we would be grateful. Your generosity helps us to keep the utilities on, maintain our building and grounds, run our various ministries, pay our staff a fair wage, and support organizations that share our UU values. You can donate online using the QR code on your order of service, or you can put cash or check in the donations and the offering baskets. Completed Circle of Candles cards should also be placed in the offering baskets. You are invited to come forward during this time and quietly drop a stone into the bowl of water here at the ramp and honor our memory of what you hold in your heart. It is through your generosity that we serve our mission here at UUCH. With gratitude, we now receive the offering. candles are lit for concern for all those who are suffering loneliness and isolation, especially those in prison. And now a meditation, our responsive music is a meditation on breathing, number 1009 in the teal hymnal.
When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love.
And now our guest speaker, Dr. Owens-Murphy.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay. I'm going to read a poem by somebody named Darrell Grayson, who was executed by the state of Alabama in 2007. And the poem is called Ghosts Over the Boiler. It's my honor to be here with you all today. Thank you for having me. A hall flunky informed the cubicle operator of a man hanging in his cell. I lifted my head. He sees preacher hanging, walks to the cubicle, calls the operator, and mumbles something, lights a cigarette, then leans. Eventually, a fat nurse climbs the stairs, another guard passes her. I continue to mop. Eventually, they come out with preacher on a stretcher with a sheet. I know he is dead. It is on his face. Like ghosts, they walk, the guard and nurse. They were talking about buying a truck. Didn't hear what kind. Well, I told a few guys. They said he was a strange old fellow. Tried to change cells. One not over the boiler. He said he couldn't take the heat. I said, yeah, those other guys were fed up too. It was bound to happen again. But what can you do when you're a ghost over the boiler? And I'd like to thank Reverend Jamie for inviting me here today, and to Zena, and to Lori for hosting. It's my honor to be here to talk to you all about something that we don't often talk about, which is capital punishment. My name is Katie. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an associate professor of English at the University of North Alabama. I teach courses in prison literature, literature of capital punishment. I facilitate a restorative justice program at Limestone Correctional Facility, not far from here, and I also work with people on Alabama's death row, which is what I'm here to talk with you all about today. And on these slides, you will see some images from our archive, which I will tell you about next. So one of the ways in which I try to use my sphere of influence to talk to people about capital punishment is through an archive that I developed at our university library called the Alabama Death Row Archive. We established it in 2019. It contains materials related to the practice and policy of capital punishment, and it centers the perspective of those who are most impacted, which in this case are those actually facing execution. Most of our materials have been donated from death row. It includes newsletters that they've created from death row, which I'll tell you about in a couple of minutes. Photographs and poetry, including Daryl Grayson's poetry, who you heard earlier. And our mission is to, support the education of the public about the death penalty using these archival materials. And so you'll see images of these on the slides as I move through them. And it's also on a digital repository, and the URL is on the bottom of this slide here. One of the reasons why we're obligated to talk about prison and the death penalty in a state like Alabama is because of our implication, because of our complicity in our incarceration rates. As you can see, we incarcerate more people per capita than the nation, and we also execute more people per capita than any other state in the nation. And so the burden is really on us to start having these conversations with friends and family and colleagues and coworkers, anybody in our spheres of influence who will listen, because one of the ways in which the system perpetuates itself is it goes unchallenged. This was part of my point of entry into capital punishment. This is Gary Drinkard. He is the 153rd death row exoneree. So he had been on Alabama's death row for 6 years for a crime he did not commit. And we're standing here next to a panel that we created on innocence and its relationship to capital punishment that we created for our university library. You can see Gary's photo is actually on the banner, and he came to discuss his experience on death row. The amazing thing about Gary is that while he was incarcerated for 6 years on death row for a crime he did not commit, he has spent more than 20 years in advocacy work afterward. And so he's somebody who continues to reach back into the system and advocate for abolition even after his release. Innocence is a very convincing argument for most people. Our rate of innocence in the United States is, our rate of error regarding innocence in the United States is quite stunning. To date, there have been 196 death row exonerees, and those are only the folks that we know about. Would we accept that rate of error for anything else? Especially something that is so final. But the conversation can't stop there. The things that allowed people like Gary to become incarcerated on death row for a crime they did not commit are part of a function of a system based on inequality. Gary was not popular in his community with law enforcement. He had a previous drug arrest history that made him vulnerable to being arrested again. In his case, his own family actually traded testimony to incarcerate him so that charges against them would be dropped. And so prosecutorial and police misconduct were a part of his case. Flimsy or no circumstantial evidence, along with testimony that's often paid or compensated. I mean, these are things that are not unique to Gary's case. These are not bugs of the system, these are features of the system. And so when we talk about innocence, I really encourage us to use that as a window into inequality that impacts really all death penalty cases and why somebody winds up on death row as opposed to in prison or even not in prison. And something Gary did not experience directly, but many of his friends on death row did, was racial inequality, because folks are much more likely to land on death row when they are black and the victim in their case is white. Gary also introduced me to this organization, Project Hope to Abolish the Death Penalty. They are the nation's only 501c3 that was founded and operates on death row. They are located right here in Alabama, in Holman Prison on death row. This is a picture of their current board of directors. The photo is from 2019. It's the most current photo we have, and I wanted you to see their faces, because another thing that we're good at doing when we talk about capital punishment is talking about it in terms of numbers. We're not so good at talking about it in terms of faces and individuating the people who are actually on death row. So this is their current board of directors, they're working to abolish the death penalty from death row. Gary was very active in the organization when he was incarcerated with them, and he continues to advocate for them and with them on the outside. On the left, you'll see Esther Brown, who's their executive director, who works diligently from the outside in order to raise awareness about abolition efforts. And then just above her is a picture, looks like a view of a cell from the inside looking out with a food tray pushed down. That's actually a drawing by Kenny Smith, who was executed January 25th of this year. It's called My View of the World. This is a news article about Kenny's execution that came out before he was executed. You've probably read about his execution in the news because he was the first person to be executed by nitrogen gas. They call it hypoxia, but it's just suffocation through nitrogen gas. It's a new execution method that a number of other states are also adopting. And I wanted to show this slide for two reasons. Number one, it shows some opportunities for using media and news as a window into conversations, starting conversations about the death penalty, but it also shows some of the limitations of the media and ways in which you can also extend that conversation to deepen it further. This is on the top is a picture of the redacted execution protocol, redacted by the Alabama Department of Corrections. It says DPI at the top there, detrimental to public interest, as if it's not in our interest to know exactly how they're killing our citizens. And the headline, objects to Kenny being essentially a test subject because it had never been tested before, and actually the Veterinary Association does not use this to euthanize animals. So it was a test, it was an experiment. And yet, the media also uses the dehumanizing language that the criminal legal system also uses in ways that justify or support things like imprisonment and capital punishment. So words like inmate, convict, I want to really encourage us to move away from that language because it's easier for us to justify things that happen to inmates and convicts than it is for us to justify or understand how it happens to people and citizens and brothers and sons and fathers and wives and daughters. It's a way of dehumanizing people and separating them from their real life relationships and from the fact that they are also citizens in this state. So using people-first language is something that we do in our program in order to remind us that these are human beings and citizens that we're talking about, and human beings and citizens who are being executed. And then also, much of the media attention focused on execution method. And you're seeing more and more media coverage about execution methods as lethal injections continue to fail. States are moving toward other methods, nitrogen gas. Utah is reintroducing the firing squad. But I also want to encourage us to move beyond those discussions of methods because there is no humane way to kill a human being. And autopsy reports show us the distress that all of these methods have on the body. There's just no humane way to kill a human being. So these are good points of entry into a conversation, but again, I want to encourage us not to stop there. This is a manuscript for Darrell Grayson's poem, Ghost Over the Boiler, which is in our archive. Darrell was a great poet. Darrell was also probably innocent. The state denied his request for DNA testing in his case, and he was executed in 2007. Darrell was convicted, like many black men on Alabama's death row, by an all-white jury. There are also policies, that we can talk to friends and family about, including in Kenny Smith's case, something called judicial override, where a jury can vote to sentence somebody to life in prison, but a judge can override that verdict. And in Kenny Smith's case, 11-1, a jury sentenced him to life in prison, and a judge overrode that verdict with death. And so he shouldn't have been on death row, and actually, were his case tried today, he would not have been on death row because judicial override is no longer legal, but was not made retroactive. There's currently a bill in Alabama's legislature to make it retroactive, so this would be another great talking point with friends and family and citizens about ways in which you can write in and be an advocate. But outside of legislative action, there are lots of ways in which you can also advocate for those behind bars and on death row. And I really want to encourage us to not become the nurse and the guard in Darrell's poem who just refuse to talk about it, who talk about what kind of truck that they're buying as they're cutting somebody down from their cell after they committed suicide on death row. When we turn away from these realities, when we turn away from these opportunities for conversation, we are complicit in that graph that I showed you about Alabama's execution and incarceration rates. So even by just engaging your community in these conversations to challenge mindsets that they've inherited but never really thought critically about, that is advocacy too. And so I really want to encourage you to use conversation as a kind of advocacy as well. So this is the book that we published together. It is called Ghost of the Boiler, titled after Daryl's poem. It is a collection of the organization Project Hope to Abolish the Death Penalty's newsletters from over the years, which includes their advocacy efforts, moratorium efforts, also their creative writings and visual art and artifacts from the archive. It's very powerful. I've helped them to frame out the pieces with research notes, and we did an interview together, wrote an introduction. And so I do want to encourage you to use this book as a resource for helping you, to fortify you in having those conversations with friends and family. I teach the book when I teach courses, and students refer to the pieces and will sometimes even read pieces aloud to friends and family as ways of opening up some of those conversations. So please do use this as a resource to fortify you in starting to have some of those conversations. And finally, there's a QR code in your church bulletin which links to a reading guide that Sam Heath from Equal Justice USA and I created to help you to work through the book. And so if you wanted to start, a book club at your church or with friends and family, or if you just wanted a direction for moving through the book based on topics, Sam and I have created that guide for you all. Please use it, please share it. And toward the end of that reading guide is a list of commonly occurring arguments for the death penalty. And so these are arguments you will hear about retribution and deterrence. And so we've linked those arguments to pieces in the book that provide you with counter arguments that were created by people on death row about why those are not legitimate arguments in favor of the death penalty. So we also wanted to fortify you with some counter arguments that you can have ready to hand to wade into some of these conversations. It takes courage to start these conversations. This is not polite dinner table discussion, I know, but as long as we continue to turn away from these discussions, like the nurse and the guard in Daryl's piece, this system continues and it continues to gain strength. So we can chip away at it by just initiating some of these small conversations in our spheres of influence. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm happy to discuss this with you all at the social hour afterward. I look forward to discussing it with you.
We could do that right now. Anybody have a question? No?
Yeah.
I don't even know what your first item on the agenda would be, like what you see as the best way forward, right?
Yeah, gosh, that's a great question, and there are so many points of intervention. It's hard to choose one. I would say something that I always point people toward is Project Hope to Abolish the Death Penalty. They do have a website, and they have action items on their website. Those are usually attached to particular executions. So right now, the state has asked for 2 new execution dates for people currently on death row, and they have not assigned those dates yet, but once those dates are assigned, there will be action items that they post, usually writing to the governor, the legislature, and so those are some small ways in which you can kind of get a start. Their website is phadp.org. So for Project Hope to Abolish the Death Penalty, phadp.org, and so you can follow their action items. But again, I even think something as simple as starting the conversation with loved ones who may never have considered the system before. The system is so normalized in states like Alabama that maybe folks haven't even really considered the implications of the system or the injustice that's baked into the system. So even just broaching the topic when it is in the news with friends and family and pushing them to think a little bit more deeply is a great start.
One video that, even though I have my opinion, even though my basic opinion was unchanged, I was already like against the death penalty. One video that really opened my eyes was something called the false execution, the false evolution of execution methods.
Mm-hmm.
Video called that.
Yeah. Repeat.
Can you say again the name of the video? The false evolution of execution methods.
Yeah,
is what
and
we're
on
talking
that
about.
note, there's a great book by Austin Sarat, S-A-R-A-T, called Gruesome Spectacles. And it's about the myth that execution methods become more humane over time, because actually lethal injection has the highest rate of botched executions of any method. So that's probably similar to what you're describing.
Yeah, you may or may not have cited that. That was, that's the basic idea.
And on that note, there's also a group called Death Penalty Action that has a website, and they have short videos on their page that are really useful, 10-minute videos from both survivors, so survivors of murder victims who have survived murder themselves who are abolitionists, also former wardens who used to carry out executions who now regret their role in executions. And so it's a great series of videos that shows people opposing the death penalty from all sorts of different angles that might surprise you. And again, those who are in your sphere of influence, I show those in my classes too, and they're really powerful.
Other question? Can you come to the microphone if you have a question? No? Did you want to ask? Come.
So it sounds to me like this, like we're doing experiments on prisoners, which would be basically unconstitutional. So how has the Supreme Court been able to allow this?
Great question. And the death penalty has been challenged over and over and over and over again on Eighth Amendment claims, all the way up through Kennedy's execution, and the Supreme Court continues to uphold the constitutionality of the death penalty. One of the Supreme Court's rulings said that in order to establish that a method is inhumane, someone on death row has to establish and prove that another method would be more humane, which is impossible. And so the Supreme Court continues to set a completely unrealistic threshold for people to meet, which just allows the system to go on. There was another really famous court case called McCleskey versus Kemp from the 1980s, which challenged structural racism and the ways in which it was embedded in the death penalty by looking statistically at how likely somebody who is black is likely to end up on death row versus somebody who's white, and also the race of the victim matters because, in general, U.S. does not sentence people to death when the victim is black. Much more likely to be sentenced to death when the victim is white, which shows bias, right, from both perpetrator and victim standpoint. And the courts acknowledged racial disparities and turned away from them and said, unless you can prove intentional and deliberate racism in each specific case, it doesn't hold. And so turning away from acknowledging structural inequality, they also said something along the lines of, if we challenge this, the whole system unravels. So you have now a court that is very dedicated to making sure that system does not unravel and is willing to justify and rationalize it in any which way. And you see the current political makeup of the Supreme Court. And so when these executions are challenged, and they do occasionally make their way up to the Supreme Court, folks usually don't find relief there, at least not now.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Be sure and come for more questions and answers after the church.
Thank you.
And I might add, and I have to because my pen pal writing program is another way to connect. Our faith, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Larger Fellowship, has a prison ministry program. You can just Google Worthy Now Prison Ministry and you'll find more about it, or you can see me. I've been doing it a couple years and it's really opened my eyes. Our closing hymn is number 1028, The Fire of Commitment. Please rise.
From the light of days remembered burns a beacon bright and clear, guiding hands and hearts and spirits into faith set free from fear. When the fire of sets our minds and soul ablaze. When our hunger and our passion meet to call us on our way, when we live with a deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin. From the stories of our living rings a beat both brave and free, calling pilgrims still to witness to the life of liberty. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion meet to call us on our way, when we live with hope, assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin. From the dreams of youthful vision comes a new prophetic voice, which demands our deeper justice, built by our courageous choice. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion meet to call us on our way, when we live with a deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin.
Now let us take a moment to extinguish our chalice with these words from Amy Zucker Morgenstern. As we leave this hallowed place, may our feet remember its feel, so that wherever we walk, we know ourselves to be on hallowed ground. May we know that we are kin with every soul, every star, every stone and leaf of grass. May our words be gentle and our touch be kind. Blessed be. Our closing words come from the Worthy Now prison ministry website. Our dream is for all who are imprisoned to know that they are inherently worthy now of love and justice. Friends, I'll be in the back of the sanctuary to answer questions. Everyone is welcome to join us for a cuppa and connection in the fellowship hall. Now let us sing our rite of community, number 1039, Be Thou With Us.